Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing? I see you have a festive shirt there. What is that? It's got flowers on it, I should say, for our vast listening audience.
You have to explain. This is a test of your news knowledge, Bob. Why is this shirt significant?
Mickey, my whole brand is not knowing what's going on in the world.
Okay, I forgot. The answer is that the Boogaloo Boys, who are allegedly...
Three of whom were arrested. Am I wrong?
I didn't follow that. I was going to look.
They were making Molotov cocktails, thus lending credence to the claim that some of these provocateurs are right-wing, although there are people who claim they're a little more complicated than just right-wing.
I'm sure there's credence. I mean, if you were a member of a crazy, a crazy, are they right wing? I don't know. They're a crazy
fringe
group, alt-right, gun-carrying group. Of course, you're going to make plans. What else are you going to do?
Yeah, in fact,
the idea that there any significant component of the protests or the looting seems crazy. Anyway, they wear Hawaiian shirts. Okay,
that's a nice. So this is one of probably not the only thing that qualifies you for membership, but it's good that you got the clothes down.
I reject this Hawaiian shirt, Bob.
Okay,
unequivocally. But anyway, Boogaloo somehow morphed into Big Luau. And they got the Hawaiian shirts. How many people at the demonstrations have you seen wearing Hawaiian shirts?
Well, they would go undercover. They would go undercover. The other thing I would say, Mickey, is there's the quantitative participation question and the qualitative. In other words, like, are they doing a small number of quite momentous acts? For example, I don't want to point fingers, certainly not at the Boogaloo Boys, but I would say that if I had to guess who basically assassinated that security guard in Oakland early on in the protests, that looks to me more like right-wing than left-wing provocation. I just don't imagine Antifa shooting a black security guard. That's not their style. Anyway.
No, it's not Antifa's style, but it might be somebody else's style.
Anyway.
If I were Jack Schaefer, I would say, do you have any evidence to support this?
And I would say no. That's why I have a podcast and not a responsible newspaper.
That would be my response, too.
Yeah.
So they lifted the curfew. I don't know if I can take all this
in DC
or
where you are in LA.
Where
or
I
DC?
am.
Oh.
It's very annoying. I mean, here I was all bunkered down with getting my food before 1 p.m., which is tough if you get up at 11, and now they're liberating me to go out. I don't want to go out. I'm all set here, but.
Well, I've got good news for the next hour, Mickey. You can and should stay exactly where you are. Okay. Mickey, I got to say, I mean, if the world continues to be as unsettled as it is, it may get hard to sustain this lighthearted banter. I don't know. I mean, how are you actually alarmed? See, one difference is I take seriously the threat of Trump's creeping authoritarianism. You don't. That's one difference. Okay, we're back after brief technical difficulties. And
Sorry.
We're both too old to remember where we were. So what do you want to talk about? We were talking about, I guess I was saying, that it's sometimes it's hard to sustain the lighthearted banter when the world is in such a weird situation. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, can we review? I mean, last week, we taped last week. Taping Friday afternoons is perilous. It seems like stuff tends to happen after Friday afternoon. Last week, what happened was kind of the protests went nationwide and got very disruptive. Friday night was the big night for that. So we had talked about the George Floyd killing a little, but at that point you hadn't even seen the video of the of his death, right? Have you?
No, you could see it. I still haven't seen it. I can't bear to watch it.
Well, it's amazing. Let me just quickly say it's amazing. You know, there are good reconstructions both in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and it's just what was going through that cop's mind. Is hard to imagine because it's just like nothing else that I'm aware of that's happened. It's not it's not like Eric Garner. It's not like any of these others in terms of how kind of egregious it is.
Well, here's two possibilities. One, we don't know what happened before they started taping. Somehow
Actually, I have a pretty good idea. That's the virtue of these reconstructions. I can talk about that.
Okay, and there was a witness in the car that this reporter for the New York Times talked to. So
who said what did that witness
I didn't read it.
Well, so
I'm afraid, but I mean, but somehow he got on the ground. Okay, how did he get on the ground?
Well, it's more complicated than that. Okay, so first of all, I'm sure he was a handful because the clerks who reported him to police, who were not white, said he seems to be drunk or something. Okay. And apparently, but when they were trying to get him in the car, he was saying, no, I'm claustrophobic. You can't put me in. But the weird thing is they got him in the car. They had him in the back seat. Now, maybe he wasn't in proper position. I don't know. But for some reason, this guy Chauvin pulled him out the other side. They had gotten him in through the left side. Chauvin goes to the other side, pulls him out. And I haven't heard an explanation for why he did that. And I think maybe he resisted going in the car in the first place. But then thereafter, I don't know what the story was, but, you know, it's so weird because, like, they called for an ambulance, a code 2 ambulance, which means don't put on the siren, don't come through, don't run red lights. Then a minute later, they changed it to a code 3. Put on the siren, run the red lights. You can only infer that at that point he was unconscious. Mm-hmm. And for at least 2 minutes afterwards, the guy still had his knee on his neck. And they have videotape of these people on the sidewalk saying, he's unresponsive. He's unconscious. And the officer is just sitting there. And earlier, by the way, they have, when he's saying, I can't breathe, some cop says, well, then get in the police car. He says, I will, I'm ready. But they don't take the knee off. It's baffling.
And how much pressure was the knee applying?
It looked like a lot. I mean, one theory I had was, well, maybe he just gets his back up and like, I'm a cop. The crowd doesn't intimidate me into doing anything, but it's just there as, you know, so he doesn't take the knee off, but he's not pressing down. But I looked closely. It looked like he was. In any event, he's crazy because, you know, these days there's video of it, and it just doesn't.
And one theory is that people often fake being sick, and the cops have learned to ignore it.
Well, somebody emailed, or maybe in the comments.
That doesn't fit the scenario you just detailed, because he obviously was sick.
No, I mean, one of our viewers or listeners said that to me. I mean, wrote it to me after our last conversation, said, these cops here, I can't breathe, and this hurts, the handcuffs hurt, and so on all day. But none of that explains how long this went on.
And is it also true that he knew the guy?
No, they both worked at this. They think they both may have worked at the same place, but one for maybe at the same time. But one of them would have been, you know, George Floyd was a bouncer. And by the way, I've learned that he did apparently lose his job because of the lockdown. So he was out of work. And he was a bouncer. The cop worked security for the same place, but the cop would have been working on the outside and Floyd on the inside. No one knows that they knew each other. Not impossible. I don't know.
Okay. But I mean, the basic point is everybody condemned this. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
99.9% of Americans
you
condemn
this. You couldn't go anywhere and find somebody who was not vociferously condemning it. That was an interesting feature.
So how did we end up with the nation being torn apart? I just think this, you know, I have a couple of theories, but the obvious theory is it's being torn apart because of anti-Trump fervor, and people sense this is the moment to express themselves against Trump. And, you know, General Mattis and a bunch of officials feel this is their moment to express themselves against Trump. And Trump isn't handling it all that well. So that's how we end up here. I think the people, I think if they're wrong, I think it's too early to go off against Trump.
That's a slightly asymmetrical view of the situation. You're just looking at why Trump critics are trying to make a big deal of this. I mean, I think...
No, I'm looking at why is there a big demonstration in front of the White House when Trump has condemned it? Why are we debating in front of the White House? Why are we protesting the White House?
Why are they protesting everywhere? I mean, of course they're going to protest in front of the White House. I mean, we know a lot of people don't like Trump. I mean, they're going to protest in D.C.
But that was an anti-Trump demonstration, wasn't it?
Well, kind of.
Why did Pelosi show up? Why did Elizabeth Warren show up? Because,
sure. Look, no doubt, of course. A lot of people hate Trump. There's a reason for that. But let's step back. I mean, my question is, what gave such incredible energy to the protests nationwide? I mean, they're still going on, and it's been almost 10 days. And
it's calmed down today. It's going to supposedly pick back up this weekend.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question. And I guess my theory is, first of all, I think it's the pandemic and the lockdown gave it energy.
Right.
I mean, there's people, a lot of people don't have a job to go to, time on their hands, they're restless. And, to the extent that there is progressive activism on campuses, and there is a fair amount, it is around the issue of social justice. And social justice isn't just about black people being killed by cops, but that's a big theme. And so I think kind of a lot of the social justice energy that, some people complain about, I mean, the people who complain about so-called social justice warriors complain about it. I think naturally it was more pent up than ever because of the pandemic. And this was a natural forum for its expression. I mean, that's part of my theory.
I agree with that. What are the other parts?
Well, I think in terms of then why does it get more intense and polarizing? I think part of it is the famous balkanization of the media and the social media. I mean, if you turn on Fox, and I will say, first of all, when I was watching the coverage in the early going, there were some things I preferred about watching Fox, just the street reporting of the demos. It was less performative than like MSNBC, and so it was more like old-fashioned reporting that right. a person of my generation is used to. But still, these are two different worlds. You go on Fox now, and the mashups you see are of looters and protesters who are out of hand. And if you go on MSNBC, now you do see some looting and stuff for sure on MSNBC, but partly because that's an opportunity for reporters to be performative. I mean, they go where the drama is as far as the live reporting. But in terms of mashups, you see, if you're a progressive, especially on social media, you are seeing mashups of cops who are seemingly abusing their power. If you are in the Fox cocoon, you are seeing mashups of looters and aggressive protesters and so on. So you're seeing, it kind of gets back to what I said last week in the context of the Central Park dog walking controversy, which is that when everyone has smartphones, every day you have the opportunity to see the worst behavior by anyone in America on your social media. We've constructed a system for delivering the most damning video of any public behavior to everyone every day. And so you're seeing the worst behavior by cops if you're on the left, and the worst behavior by protesters, looters, and so on if you're on the right. And the rest is history. And the longer it goes on, the more, bad behavior there is.
I'm sure that's part of it. I have two more theory, because I'm not just judging by my friends. They're all sending me clips, and they're all police brutality clips, and they're not seeing the other side. Although secretly, of course, they are. That's the other thing.
What do you mean? How are they?
West Side liberals who send around clips of cops beating innocent protesters are also buying guns. Okay, they don't think it's just the problem with the cops.
Well, also your friends aren't really woke.
They think excuse me. Excuse me.
They're not woke. They're
excuse me. They're fucking woke. They're wokey woke. They're the wokest.
They're not woke.
they're incredibly woke.
It's like Mike Tinsley said, Al Gore is an old person's idea of a young person. Your friends are an old person's idea of a woke person.
I don't know. Their kids are sort of.
Hey, I am one of your friends, okay?
Their kids are certainly woke. You're not one of my West Coast friends, man.
Oh, their kids are. Tell me about it. You want to know who the least woke person in my household is?
You.
You're looking at him.
Yeah, okay.
By a long shot.
Anyway, I have two other reasons. One is deep underlying social forces. This is obviously just a feeling of the moment, but in the 60s, you had the idea, okay, I'm in college, I'm protesting, there's tear gas everywhere. There's no fucking way that capitalism's still going to be here when I graduate from college. It's like, it's all over. There's going to be some new system. And for the first time, I got a whiff of that same sentiment that really there is going to be something new because we're heading for a crash. And that may be wrong, but it probably is wrong since it was wrong in the 60s. But, we have young people whose economic future is like bleak. They're moving into their parents' homes. They can't pay they can't pay their loans. Even if they get a job, it's not particularly a job they want. It doesn't match their hopes and expectations. It's some crappy job for some tech company that's destroying the world. It's just all very unpleasant. And plus, they're imbued with this idiotic social justice mentality from college, and it's a recipe for disaster. Okay, the fourth thing is,
I'm not sure I follow all that. Of course, they wouldn't use the word idiotic. They would sign on to the earlier part of what you said. I think among like millennials and Gen, I guess Zers, there's a lot of there's a certain amount of complaining about the weird kind of environment they graduated into, certainly including the jobs environment, and I think it's justified. It's a weird, insecure world they entered to begin with, and you were hearing that before the unemployment rate was, whatever it is now, 15%. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. No,
but they don't agree that their ideology is idiotic. Like many people, they don't agree with
right. Like the writers for the New York Times. We'll get to that. But
great tease there, Mickey.
The fourth factor is just technological asymmetry. In other words, I don't know what the name for this scenario is. I would call it the Clockwork Orange scenario, except I forget. In Clockwork Orange, did Malcolm McDowell roam the streets freely beating up people? Or it seems to me he was busted and tortured.
I don't think I ever actually saw that movie.
But anyway, the point is, maybe they have the advantage. If you read the stories on the L.A. looting, it was very well organized via cell phones. People pulled up in caravans of cars. They knew which stores to loot. They were directed to get this and get that. And they were gone, even if the cops had sort of been alert to it, and they weren't. They were off, dealing with the protests most of the time. But even if they'd been on the job and they knew, hey, there might be looting tonight and we have no protests to worry about, it's not clear to me the cops could stop it. Because they move so fast, they're in and out, boom, what are the cops going to come? Mow them down with machine guns? No. You need a whole operation to stop that.
Well, yeah.
And the cops can't mobilize the operation fast enough to stop them before they leave. So we're in a guerrilla war situation where the guerrillas win.
Well, right. The cops... first of all, I suspect the protests were especially far-flung because there was at least modest social distancing often. So they weren't super dense. So there was a huge amount of area that the police had to police. And then if the looters are going somewhere else altogether, the cops are in a tough place. And that's what looters did. And as you said, apparently in some cases they did so in organized fashion. Yeah, it's a Well, the question is whether the cops screwed up by paying attention to the protests instead of the looting. And I don't know the answer to that. In part, it depends on, was there overlap between the protests and the looting? Was there violence at the protests? And, I've been at protests. I was at the first protest I ever went to was in, dare I say it, 1964. It was against the Vietnam War. It was outside the Century Plaza Hotel, and the mayor of L.A. was on the balcony, and Lyndon Johnson was in town, I guess. And I decided to go protest the war with my parents. Okay, it was like a very peaceful with my doctor.
not my father, but my mother. And
that was pretty early to protest the war, 64, man.
Yeah, well, we didn't know we were anti-war until we went there. It was just we went to... We didn't like what... And then all of a sudden... Anyway, and there was one guy in the crowd with a tire iron. There's always one guy who's trouble, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden the police charge and start busting heads and chasing us all around. And it seemed completely unprovoked, and it probably was, but maybe the cops could point to the guy with the tire iron and say... this guy's... It's always a mixture. There's always some excuse for the cops to bust heads. And if it's just that, if they just let the protests stay, maybe it would have dispersed peacefully, or maybe the protesters would have, pushed the limits and tried to see if they could provoke the cops. You never know what's going to happen. It's always a mixture, but you have to think that if they had an anti-looting strategy as opposed to an anti-demonstration strategy, it would have been more successful.
Yeah, I mean, it naturally took them a long time to get the picture. This was, for one thing, it spread to a lot of cities that had no reason to expect a protest anytime soon, and it happened fast. It spread to a lot of cities. It was a totally new environment. It's in the middle of the pandemic. The other thing is these people are wearing masks so they can proceed. If you're a looter, or if you're just a provocateur and want to just cause trouble, it's a lot easier to do it when you got a mask on, because the chances of getting caught are a lot slimmer.
Right.
Because video's not going to help the cops much. That is normally a real deterrent. So it was a tough situation for
It's a little weird. I mean, in Beverly Hills, for example, they knew that Rodeo Drive was going to be targeted a day in advance. Mm-hmm. They still couldn't stop it. Very weird.
So there are the conspiracy theories that the cops want to show you how much they're needed. That
was the theory in New York.
Yeah.
Especially. People felt the cops
I don't especially buy, but it's a theory.
New York has an incredible number of cops, okay? I think it's 39,000.
Yeah, but it's also a huge city, and they had an incredible number of people protesting.
Much smaller than Los Angeles, and we have half the number of cops. So Los Angeles is vast areas of real estate.
I'll bet more people were protesting in New York than in Los Angeles.
But if the cops wanted to protect stores in Midtown Manhattan, they could have 100 cops on every block, and they could stop it. And they didn't, and people thought that was because the cops really wanted to let the looting happen and show how much they're needed, as a protest against the city leadership, too.
Well, I always leave the conspiracy theorizing to you, and you
started this one, Bob.
Once again. No, I alluded darkly to conspiracy theorists.
The people said that. I don't think in L.A. it was that. I think it would be more reluctance to use force in a way that might lead to more videos of more people being brutalized.
Now, are you not terribly worried? I mean, I am worried by something that I think you're not worried by, which is... I now have a scenario where Trump's authoritarianism becomes truly worrisome, and I can see, I think, how we get there.
Yes,
I've written this piece, and it will show up presumely in my newsletter, which, by the way, people can subscribe to at nonzero.org.
I look forward. I'm less worried. I do think it's hard to defend the clearing of the protesters in the park, so Trump could make his walk. I mean, I assume they will sue the government and win millions of dollars, as happened in a more clear-cut case on the Capitol when people were just sitting there and they got arrested. They all won big judgments. This is, maybe there was a guy with a tire iron like in 1964, and the cops can say, "Oh, we were provoked by his tire iron." All that evidence will come out, but no. I haven't seen it. It sure looks from the evidence that exists now that they were supposed to clear the area earlier.
Oh, but didn't you hear William Barr? Didn't you hear William Barr saying the two were totally unconnected, Trump's speech and the clearing of the park, Mickey?
Well, Barr also said that Epstein didn't kill himself. I mean,
I was being sarcastic. Barr
lies. Barr lies occasionally.
Well, but this is one of his more glaring lies. I mean, this is embarrassing. And in fact, if you watched him tell it, he did this tell. He looked to the side as he delivered the actual lie. Yeah. I mean, this was embarrassing. I mean, usually, anyway.
I'm not defending the lie. They should. It was perfectly justifiable that they would not have any protesters in the square at all, and they wanted to clear it out hours before, and they should have cleared it out hours before. They'd burned down a building, which I had initially thought was
the night before, which was a bathroom, I think, right?
It was the facilities building,
Probably
Bob.
the first time in years you've been able to get access to the bathroom is when they finally burned the doors off. I used to live in D.C., and I assure you that bathroom was not available.
I at first thought it was a guard. It was first identified as a guard station. It apparently wasn't a guard station. It was a facilities building that had bathrooms and like a storage shed for something. I don't know. But then it was also built by Ryan Lizza even as a historic building. Anyway, it's a building within a stone's throw of the White House that got burned, okay? It seems to me if that happens, you're allowed to say, okay, we're moving the perimeter out so that it's further away from the White House.
Two things.
That's perfectly reasonable. That's in fact what they've done now.
Two things. It burned down the night before.
Yeah.
And so they plan to move. Here's how we know, I think, for sure that this thing was ordered precisely to coincide with Trump's little Rose Garden talk, is that they started clearing it out 25 minutes before curfew began.
Right, no. But
well, why would you do that? Why would you not wait for curfew?
No, I agree with that. But all I'm saying, Bob, is if you read the accounts, they were supposed to have cleared it out that morning for valid security reasons and maybe also for this PR opportunity.
But at 6:35, obviously, if they decide to clear it, they're going to say, okay, we'll wait.
I'm not disputing that. I'm agreeing with that.
Okay.
I'm agreeing with that.
Let me say one more thing about that, and this gets to the creeping authoritarianism thing. Did you see the video where the TV cameraman gets roughed up? So, like, they start moving this kind of suddenly. I think they say they gave a warning, and I think some people say they heard a warning. Many people say they didn't hear a warning. But in any event, it's kind of, it's just sudden. They start moving in. The cops are going to clear it. This TV cameraman is sitting on the side with a camera. So it's not like he chose to get in the way or anything. And he's kind of, it's kind of a surprise. He's had about 3 seconds to react. And rather than just say, move along, a cop swings the cop's shield into his body, like really aggressively, and then punches him in the face. I mean, this was like out of a kind of like a fascist movie or something. Well, and it's important to remember these are park police, so these are cops who know that the ultimate authority is Donald Trump. These aren't municipal cops. And they also know that he hates journalists. So I'm just saying these are the little kinds of things that I think should really
And you think that leads to fascism in America?
Well, I have a scenario according to which we should be worried, but that's not it. That's just one of the signs.
Cops tend to beat people up when they're told to clear a square. That's happened.
Yeah, but
I've seen,
Mickey,
it's almost happened to me a couple times.
But this is what's interesting.
They don't look for your press pass first. So
first of all, you were protesting back before smartphone days. Cops are by and large, more careful than they were in the 60s. We've seen nothing like Chicago 68 so far.
I'm talking about a recent demonstration where I tried to step off a curb to take a smartphone picture, and the cops almost beat me up. They have
almost. What did they actually do?
Get the fuck back on the curb.
Did they punch you?
No, I was. But
then that distinguishes your case from the one I just described fairly sharply. Punched the guy in the face.
But it seemed to me an overreaction. The point is that they are all hyped up and they overreact. That's what happens.
Well, I just want to say I feel your pain, Mickey. But back to the person who was actually punched in the face. Okay, Is that your phone? It sounds like an old-fashioned phone.
That's
it sounds like
an old-fashioned phone. That's
Roy
probably
Rogers. Is it on the wall?
It's probably the city calling to say that there's another curfew, or perhaps an inspirational message from our mayor. Anyway,
it's a great ring. So here's the thing. This was one of the most egregious. I've looked at a lot of cop video over the last week, and the truth is, if you look at these supposedly outrageous mashups, half the time, I think, well, first of all, I'd like to know what preceded this, why the cop was unhappy with the guy. Secondly, this shouldn't shock you. Like there was one that people were going, oh, he hit the guy over the head, and it's a guy who tried to intervene while the cops were trying to detain somebody. He grabbed the guy, tried to pull him away from the cop. Let me tell you something, folks. When cops are trying to detain someone, they are they are hell-bent on it, and if you try to actually impede them, you may get hit on the head. That's life.
That's even true of that old man who got pushed over. If you look at the video, I think he grabbed something on the cop's uniform before he gets pushed over, and the cops don't like that either.
That's another interesting case. If you look at that close, and that was sad because, did you have the volume up? You could hear his head hit the concrete.
Oh, no.
But if you look at it, what happened is no cop was trying to push him to the ground. I mean, this also created huge outrage. These cops had just started a sweep of a plaza. They had just started. It was time. I guess it was curfew. And this guy, rather than recede, walks up and tries to talk to them. Two cops at the same time try to just push him forward. One with his billy club in the two hands, but just trying to kind of push him. The other one applies force. And then a third, apparently superior officer, pushes the one with the billy club, meaning move forward, don't let him stop you. None of them was trying to push him to the ground. Yeah. It just happened. And this is what I mean. I just want to get back to the fact that what happened in that park was extraordinary. It was extraordinarily abusive, and it happened with federal law enforcement officials who report to Trump and not municipal officials. And nothing is going to happen to them, I assure you, precisely because Trump is the ultimate arbiter.
I don't think
what happens.
You may be right about the line of hierarchy, but A, nothing would happen to them anyway. B, I don't think it was extraordinarily abusive. And C, it's a violation of the Constitution whether they're abusive or not. I mean, you're peacefully protesting. They're not supposed to clear you out politely or impolitely.
What do you mean? It's a.
They're not supposed to clear the square if you're peacefully protesting. Even if they politely say, "Could you please leave, ma'am? We're going to tie you up now nicely with the handcuffs." That's a violation of the First Amendment.
My only point was, and I think it stands. This really was different from what you're seeing on other police videos. I'm telling you, it was so gratuitous.
It was no different than the Century Plaza in 1964.
Well, fine, but that was before smartphones. I'm telling you, this was just a different level of police conduct. We can link to it on Blogging Heads TV. And by the way, I mean, I think maybe, it's hard to tell the way they're clad. I think maybe the cop who did it was a woman.
No.
But in any event, it was a very abusive cop. And I think qualitatively different. Right. So gratuitous.
Very similar to all the stuff that went on in the 60s. Before
Mickey,
smartphones, I understand.
Okay, I'm going to say this one last time.
But
that was a different era before smartphones.
But you say it's extraordinarily abusive. It's not extraordinarily abusive. It's been going on for centuries.
Also, if you compare it to the Roman Colosseum, it doesn't look that bad, Mickey. I'm just comparing it to municipal cops now. Okay? The key distinction being it's a federal cop. And I'm telling you, this is one reason to worry about Trump sending troops all across the country, which he would like to do.
He's got control of 300 park policemen.
He would like to do more, but he got the blowback from military elites, which has stayed his hand from the time being, which is extraordinary in itself. Say what you will about Jim Mattis's motivations. Mattis had those motivations for a long time now and never spoke up. And Mark Esper, who knew he had it in him, the current Secretary of Defense, to basically diss Trump big time.
I don't doubt that they were embarrassed by being involved in that, and that was prompted.
Well, that doesn't explain Mattis.
Well, sure it does. He would object. He would object to. He would object to the military being used inappropriately.
That's what I mean. It was an objection of principle occasioned by what he considered to be a dire situation where Trump was about to do something that he thought would be dangerous. Yeah, that's my point.
We're agreeing, but of course, Mattis had differences of principle before, part of which you would disagree with. He wanted us to stay involved in Syria.
I'm not a Mattis fan, by the way. Yeah. It's hilarious listening to the, needless to say, checked in on the Bannon podcast. And it was a day when Bannon wasn't there, but I suspect they had conferred on what the line was going to be on Mattis. And it's amazing. It's like, I mean, obviously, okay, Mattis is the enemy for them now, and maybe Bannon didn't like him to begin with, but they have this whole story about how military generals in general it's like a left wing, that's the term they used, a left wing like cabal of, and by the way, that's bizarre rhetoric that almost seems designed to pave the way for some pretty extraordinarily scary behavior by Trump. I mean, like as if anticipating that it's going to be him against the military and they want the enlisted men on their side or something. It's weird.
This idea that Trump is going to pull off fascism in America is insane. He can't even arrange a walk across the park.
Well, this is my piece. I address this in my piece. And what I mean,
if he fires all the generals and appoints Jared Kushner chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he'll be impeached. It's over for him. He's not going to be able to do that.
Let me just give you the short version of my thesis in this piece, which will probably be in the newsletter soon. It's true that for the first 3 years, Trump's saving grace was his incompetence and his self-absorption. It meant that he couldn't. He just didn't have the capacity to kind of slowly, insidiously implement an authoritarian regime. But finally, one thing that happened a few months ago is his incompetence led the pandemic to get worse than it had to, which meant the lockdown was more stringent than it would have been, which means we're still living with a little bit of both lockdown and pandemic. That set the stage. That made the demonstrations more intense in ways we have discussed. I mean, and for that matter, George Floyd would have had a job and might not have had any counterfeit cash. But anyway, so that set the stage for this. And now, we have seen him make a number of recent, I think, authoritarian moves. And the key thing is, I've always thought that the standard scare scenarios about fascism were naive, precisely because Trump is too incompetent to do it smoothly. But
well, he also has no troops. Hitler had a vast organization of brown shirts. Trump has nobody.
Oh, that's not true. He has nobody. He has the guys who showed up in Michigan with guns. He has.
Okay, that's 50 people.
No, they're all. Look, here is my theory: is that
he has some people, but he doesn't have. He doesn't have enough troops to bring fascism to America.
Here is my theory, is that whether he can get away with something like the, what's the name of the act that he didn't invoke that lets him send troops everywhere?
Insurrection Act.
The Insurrection Act. Whether he gets away with that, for starters, depends on how scared people are about social chaos. There is always going to be a level of chaos and fear that will let a leader get away with just about anything.
Well, what is your...
Okay, here's the next level, which this showed signs of reaching, is violent conflict between groups of Trump supporters and Trump's opponents. It almost happened in Philadelphia. There were these guys in Fishtown, a white working class neighborhood. Many of whom were not enthusiastic about the progressive gentrifiers who had been in their midst for some time to begin with. They were walking around with things like baseball bat, golf club, hatchet. One guy had a hatchet. They're like milling around, ready to go after the left. Okay, they were very close. The police came, and it didn't happen. They defused it. But there was another instance somewhere where you could see the stirrings. I'm just saying. I mean, there's a long time between now and the election. Trump has an interest in continuing to stir the pot. And I'm just saying that is the level. Like, if you saw group conflict, violent conflict, people getting killed, Trump supporters versus opponents, and that went nationwide, at that point, all bets are off. He would shut down Twitter. He would do whatever he had to, and I think he would get away with it. So that's my scare scenario.
If there's skirmishes between Fishtown and leftists and he shuts down Twitter, I think that's insane.
Mickey.
Plus, the idea he's not going to be able to turn the National Guard to his will and turn them into his pawns.
Well, no,
he's not going to turn the military into his pawns. He does not have the manpower or the organization or the organizational ability, but forget that, the organization, to pull off any kind of authoritarian coup. He doesn't. There was a very good Ross Douthat column about this. He doesn't have what Orban has, even in Hungary.
What does Orban have that he doesn't have?
He has a whole party apparatus of apparatchiks who are thousands of them for a country that's much smaller than ours, who are loyal to him, and that's how they get their meal ticket.
Trump has two things.
He has Steve Bannon.
No, he has two things. He has a lot of support among enlisted people in the military, and those are the people in numbers. He has a lot of that support that may be dwindling, but he still has a fair amount. He has a lot of supporters who are civilians but have guns. Okay? And, you're saying one fight in Fishtown? Well, look, 9 days ago you would have said one protest in Minneapolis. Well, just like that, it went nationwide and big time. Things can go nationwide fast in this environment, especially with media and social media feeding two totally different narratives to people. And
so you think we have a national informal civil war, and he uses that to assert some sort of fascistic power?
Well, for starters, the Insurrection Act. I mean, he would get the troops sent, and generals wouldn't resist. If there's enough chaos, it's not like generals are going to refuse to carry out his orders. He would get the troops out there.
I'm for invoking the Insurrection Act. The National Guard has, the National Guard has calmed things down. Bob, 32 states already have the National Guard deployed.
That's the National Guard. That's not troops reporting to Trump. That's troops reporting to the governors.
Well, they get federalized and then they report to Trump. So
that's what I don't want.
But they were federalized in L.A. in the riots. I'm sure some of them are federalized.
No, I don't think any are now, except in D.C. there are troops who report to Trump because D.C. is D.C.
Do you think? So you think it matters? I think the Insurrection Act. Does the Insurrection only apply to federalized National Guard troops? I guess so.
I think the Insurrection Act allows him to send regular troops, let alone the National Guard. I believe it would allow him to send the 82nd Airborne. That's what Tom Cotton wanted, right?
Well, Eisenhower sent the 101st to Arkansas.
Okay, that's what I mean. In a somewhat better cause, I might say, but yeah.
Yeah, so your theory is he has the National Guard troops, they're under state control, he federalizes them, and then issues the order to what?
I think, again, it's all a function of how scared people get. So if people are scared enough, he, shuts down social media, which he said he would do 10 days ago.
He shuts down. He shuts down.
He refuses. He cancels.
And when the court says no, you can't do that, then what happens?
Well, first of all, the courts are a lot less likely to defy him than they were before they appointed so many judges over the last few years. Look? All I'm saying is, look, we did lock up Japanese Americans in World War II. It seems amazing now, but what that tells you is if Americans get scared enough, whether it's by a foreign threat or by the threat of domestic chaos, they're just like people everywhere else. If they get scared enough, they'll put up with almost anything, and including canceling an election, including Trump saying, "Well, we can't have an election amid this." Believe me, I'm not saying that the chances are even 10% of this happening. I'm saying they're higher than 1% of things getting a lot weirder than we imagine right now.
Well, you've made it more plausible than it was before when I was accused of aiding the fascist takeover of America. But I think it's pretty far-fetched. I mean, the most likely result is that people will get disgusted and Trump will lose the election 60-40, which he may do anyway.
Well, he may.
He's not a court-defying guy. He hasn't defied a court yet.
The last thing I want to say, just in my defense, to fend off the conservative blowback I'll get, is, if you ask what's put me in this kind of alarmed state, a non-trivial part of it is watching the way progressives are reacting on social media, on cable news. They seem to me completely irrational. They seem not all of them, but they look at these partial videos of cops doing something. They have no knowledge of what led up to it. They don't, they don't know. Well, was it curfew? Was
and they
it this
say
way?
there's going to be a fascist takeover of America. Isn't that what you just did?
Yeah. Well, no, that's the point. I am not succumbing to that kind of bait. I'm telling you what worries me is the fact that so many people are succumbing to that kind of bait on both left and right. And you really should watch one of Tucker Carlson's riffs. That guy is scary.
Why is he scary? I've sort of liked the riffs I've seen.
Oh man, the one video he showed, I'm pretty sure it was him. And like, you just imagine the punch this packs. It was totally unlike all the others. What it was the guy filming was clearly a black guy. There's a white woman, a protester, social justice warrior, whatever. And he says, can you get down on your knees and ask forgiveness for your privilege? She gets, and she like gets down on his knees, or knees, it's something like this. I'm not getting it exactly right. And she says, now ask forgiveness. And she says, I just can't quite think of the right words. I'm just saying, you imagine some of the Fox News audience. You got a black man telling a white woman to get down on her knees. And I needn't go on to tell you what some people in Fox News' audience are thinking. And Tucker Carlson knows that damn well. He knows what kind of dark stuff he's playing with. But he's completely unprincipled. You think it's playing on they're coming for our women? You might say. I mean, it was a totally ridiculous thing. It makes me, embarrassed that she and I are both progressives because it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like, lady, you were born with your privilege. You don't have to apologize for it. Okay.
Well, maybe Tucker's play. I think Tucker is smart enough to know all the implications of what he's showing.
Yeah.
I liked his attack on Jared Kushner. That's the part I saw.
He's good. He's good.
My attitude before you outline this 0.0001% of a dark percent chance of a dark outcome is the National Guard is what happens when they're the people that end the riots and looting. That's what happened in L.A. in '92. Every city where they've been deployed.
Yep.
They've calmed things down. New York hasn't been deployed, and New York is still a mess. Okay,
it didn't work out at Kent State very well, but often it works out.
Kent
fine.
State was bad, yeah, but anyway.
I think that was the National Guard. Yes,
it was probably the state National Guard. Yes.
Well, it tends to be. That's the point. It tends to be. But that's sort of what happened.
Given this asymmetry problem, the undermanning, and the fact that there's just not enough police to stop this sort of thing. They need reinforcement. That's what the L.A. mayor did. He declared at the beginning of the week, we're not going to ask for the National Guard. And then he saw that his police were badly overmanned, and he asked for the National Guard. And now we have the National Guard, and things are at least a little quieter.
Fine, but as I understand it, they are under the governor's control, so I'm not alarmed.
Okay. No, I understand. You think that somehow the fact that Trump has formal control of them.
I just see the forces in motion on both sides.
The National Guard is going to have pitched battles with the woke people, or they're going to stir up a war between the woke people and the Fishtown people? What's going to happen?
No, I think it's within Trump's power to stir up a war between
Right, so what does the National Guard get in?
Well, first of all, a key step here is we have a bunch of troops under Trump's authority.
I understand that's
and he says, go shut down the Los Angeles Times or something. Go occupy the Los Angeles Times. The law says they're supposed to obey. That's what the law says.
Right, and then there's an immediate injunction from a court, and then what happens? That's just not going to happen. But it is he's not that ballsy. But
I don't know, or the sheer sense of oppression at the individual level. People occupying, I don't know, soldiers occupying this or that, shutting down social media. I just, I worry, and I worry about the conflict itself. I mean, I don't think extensive civil conflict is as unlikely as some people think.
Well, you're crazy paranoid, but not quite as crazy as I thought at the beginning of this.
Thank you. Coming a crazy paranoid.
Also, really,
that's a compliment.
I've been outdone. Also, no, I do sense for social fragility in a way that didn't exist before. That sort of dovetails with what I was saying at the beginning. But I don't think it's going to happen, and I think it's more than anything. It's more what I call I don't know what I guess the best I've been able to come up with is the Trump cooties theory, is sensible solutions when advocated by Trump. Suddenly half the country opposes them because they're advocated by Trump. That happened with the border wall. That happened with the National Guard recently. And there's a third one here that I can't read, but chloroquine. All of a sudden chloroquine got politicized, and you couldn't just say, let's see what the studies say. You have to if you were against Trump, you have to be against chloroquine. Okay? You have to be against the law, and you have to be against sending in the National Guard, which is a totally ordinary.
Well, that's more complicated because
multiple times in American history, and it seems to have a beneficial effect.
Well, again, I think the question is whether they're under the governor's authority. But anyway, on chloroquine, I agree. That still hasn't been given a fair shake. And as you know, the study I complained about has now fallen into deeper question. The study that seemed to show it contributes to death, and I pointed out that it was a study that didn't seem worth paying any attention to. It turns out there's a whole nother reason to not pay attention to that. The very foundation of the data is now in question. I mean, we don't have to dwell on that. But that study led to, anyway, I agree with your point that there's too much reactivity to Trump and things he endorses.
There's a sort of a different point involving this chloroquine study, which is the WHO, even though seemingly every person who knows what they're doing who looked at this study said it like you, it's crap. Okay? Yeah. And the WHO looked at the study, and they, as you said last time, they paused the trial that was going to tell us whether this stuff worked or not.
Right. Okay? That was a true controlled study.
There's an American study. They did not pause the study. They looked at the data, and they looked at what was happening with their people, and they said, no, well, let's keep this going. Okay? That was the right call. The WHO made the wrong call. Trump has pulled out of the WHO, or he says he's going to, and people like the Dan Dresners of the world are saying, we should work from within to transform the WHO. It's counterproductive and destructive to pull out. And I look at it, and I think of Albert Hirschman's theory of exit, voice, and loyalty. Exit meaning if you don't like an institution, you leave and go to try to form a new institution. And voice means you stay and try to use your voice to change the institution. Almost always exit is more effective than voice. It's easier to not go to a restaurant than to teach the chef how to cook. So why stick with the WHO and try to somehow turn it around? That seems to be an almost impossible job. You have tenured bureaucrats there. You have to start at the top and change the culture one by one while they have countervailing pressures to suck up to China. Forget it. Start your new organization. It's much easier.
I don't accept the premise that the WHO is deeply flawed. As I said last week, I think the reason they had to stop that study is because so many of the doctors participating in it from various countries said, I don't want to go on with this, and they were kind of stuck. But the, that
would be a flaw.
Look, the main shortcomings of the WHO, as with so many international institutions, are that it's just not very powerful. And if you ask why aren't these institutions more powerful, it tends to be the case that the U.S. doesn't want them to be, and it has kept them from being more powerful. The WHO is only as strong as its members. It has very little actual authority.
The WHO has to suck up to China. That's the problem.
That's right, because it has to kind of cajole information out of countries.
Right.
Well, that's an institutional failing that the U.S. is as responsible for as anybody else.
We should use the Insurrection Act to give them a National Guard so they can go get the information from China. I am
in favor of the WHO invoking the Insurrection Act, yes, and sending troops globally. Yes.
Well, we found a way to employ all these soldiers who are going to be out of work otherwise.
We found common ground, Mickey.
Okay. I do.
So wait, as long as you're on the subject of the pandemic, aren't you worried about? I mean, two things. All of these protests cannot help but have done at least some spreading of the virus. The other thing they've done is now made it so that the anti-lockdown people can blame the protesters if there is a resurgence and say the problem wasn't ending like lockdown. So it's turned the tables rhetorically. Yes,
it's been a tremendous boon to the anti-lockdown people. Mm-hmm. But that's the positive scenario, is maybe the anti-lockdown people are right, and all these demonstrations actually forced the left to agree to do the thing, loosening up, that will work. We don't know that. We don't have enough data to assess whether that's true or not. And the other thing is, it's possible that the scary effect of the demonstrations in terms of keeping the silent majority at home outweighed the spreading effect of the demonstrators who actually showed up and congregated.
Well, conceivably, but that's not the way the rhetoric will play out. And you know, I want to add, I see the argument. I mean, the people who are saying, wait a second, we couldn't go to church, which is very meaningful to us, but because these protests are meaningful to you, now suddenly the rules are, are suspended. I think that's a question that deserves attention. It's a legitimate question.
And at some point, I think it becomes a constitutional issue. If de Blasio says, well, the protests that I like can go on, but the protests that I don't like violate social distancing rules, you have a basic, censoring of viewpoint speech. And there's I think, a coherent but a venerable line of Supreme Court opinion saying, if the decisive factor is what's the content on the placard, what does the placard say? You can't discriminate on that basis. It violates the Equal Protection Clause. Anyway, so yes, I agree with that. I don't have that much to add about the pandemic, since I think this will offer a great empirical test as to whether social distancing was worth it.
Well, but it doesn't.
We don't know yet.
Because lockdown ended at roughly the same time, so it'll totally confound the variables.
Well, no, because both of them led to more interactions and more spread of disease, supposedly.
Right. Well, yeah.
So if the result is that there's no spike in deaths, then the anti-lockdown people have won, huh?
Well, or spike in cases. I mean, that's in a way. I mean, as I suggested last week, we may be getting better at preventing the deaths, lowering the ratio of deaths to cases.
Well, then but if it just results in a flu that goes away, then the anti-lockdown people are right. It's not worth it.
Well, they're right for a different reason. Yeah, I mean, they're not right because lockdown was not preventing the spread.
It could cause lasting horrible damage and not kill you. I agree.
Yeah, it's just weird. I mean,
but I have nothing to add on the lockdown front other than it's like that old. We had the lockdown and the curfew on top of the riot curfew on top of the lockdown, and it's a little like, it feels like such a relief to be in the lockdown again. It's like the old story about you go to the rabbi and say, I lost my wife and my job, and the rabbi says, taking a goat, and you come back the next week and say, I still feel crappy. He says, taking a sheep, and and the next day taking a cow, and then at the end he says, Rabbi, I'm losing my mind, and he says, well, get those animals out of there, Jesus. So then you feel fine. So they got rid of the curfew, and suddenly the lockdown feels like incredible freedom. I can go walk in the park. It's incredible.
Yes, if social unrest does not rear its head anew. I mean, who knows what'll happen? Well, it's Friday. Who knows what'll happen tonight, right? Now, are you glued to the TV set during much of this?
No, because I don't have cable.
You don't have cable?
I don't have cable. I'm not a cord cutter. I'm living in a place I have moved into that has a lot of problems, and getting cable is not tops on my list.
Too bad. This is almost the only time that cable news is interesting to me, is watching the different styles of reporting from the different cable networks.
It's true that since all I'm producing is tweets, I might as well have cable. Cable gets in the way of writing anything longer because you have no attention span.
Right.
But,
as it has.
I have one more Trump-related point.
Okay.
At the beginning of the week, it's before the George Floyd thing, it looked like there was going to be a big fuss over Trump's opposition to Jeff Sessions. I don't think we talked about this last week.
I think we did. I think we did mention Sessions, didn't we?
I would before this week. I would like. I think Trump has a big second term problem, which is why are we looking forward to a Trump second term? He doesn't have to please the base, so people like me who want immigration control. Bob, your hair looks totally out of control.
Well, the pandemic's been going on a while, and we're finally heading into Eraserhead territory.
You look like a mad scientist. You look like the guy from Back to the Future, Christopher, what is his name? Anyway.
You don't think it's a good look?
No, it's a terrible look. It's like, this is the madman who predicts fascism in America. Don't believe him, okay? So, anyway, there's no seeming controls on Trump in the second term. Whether or not he's a fascist, he will be free of the need to please the base.
Yeah, you don't want to lame duck Trump.
He has gotten rid of all the people in the White House who tell him no, and replace them with people who tell him yes, except for Jared Kushner, who is his own independent force, who Trump apparently can't get rid of, who is assuming more and more duties.
They're related.
So you want Jared Kushner to be running the United States government? I mean, in the second term, I mean, there's a whole scenario that my friend Ryan Jerdusky outlined, which I think is true, is the reason Trump looked so weak hiding in his bunker for 4 days before the Monday speech, without doing anything, without giving a speech to address the unrest, without playing the Nixon card or any card, was because Jared was out of town celebrating a holiday. They had to wait till President Kushner came back before they can settle on a policy. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Jared is running things. So do you want that? And the Sessions election is in this situation where this is where Trump needs to be whacked on the head with a 2x4 and said, no, you don't have total control. The base can sometimes tell you, no, you're wrong. Stop this. And voting for Sessions in Alabama in July is a way for them to do that. And that's why I thought it was important that Ann Coulter went berserk and started tweeting madly against Trump's opposition to Sessions, which is Trump's is insane and obsessed and egomaniacal and petty. And he's endorsed a guy who doesn't believe in his agenda, at least what we thought was his agenda, and is opposing a guy who does believe in his agenda. So Trump is wrong, and he needs to be told he is wrong. And if that's not the occasion, we need some occasion where Trump gets whacked on the head with a 2x4 and realizes, no, he's not in total control. And maybe people aren't really happy with Jared Kushner running things in the White House. So, Tucker did his best. Tucker did whack him with a 2x4 when he in a long diatribe against Kushner. It remains to be seen if that has any effect. It may just contribute to a general Trump meltdown.
This is an embarrassing question, but catch me up to speed on the Sessions thing. Has the primary happened?
The primary got postponed, I think, to July 14th.
Okay, so the second thing, is there any chance at all that the seat goes Democratic? There's not, right? It's a question of which Republican?
Oh, there's a definite chance. I mean, one of the the Republican primary is that's right. We talked about this because it's a guy named Tuberville,
right,
and Jeff Sessions, and we don't know what goods they have on Tuberville. If they have goods on Tuberville, they're not. The Democrats and the media are not going to deploy them now. They're going to wait till he's the nominee and then dump them on him. We know there's some things.
So
we know
I'm
he
for
was
Tuberville. Okay, good.
I just want to
remind myself.
I doubt that they have anything like they had on Roy Moore. I'm a Tuberville man when it comes to the primary. Right. I doubt. But there is a chance that he gets nominated and then there's a huge scandal and he loses.
Okay. So you're possibly my only friend who's concerned that Jeff Sessions may not be in the Senate next year. But tell me this.
Here I've outlined the larger implications of it, Bob, and you just ignore them.
Okay. I didn't mean to be dismissive. But speaking of larger implications, so you're worried. Well, you're envisioning a second Trump term. Does this mean you're no longer well, how do you think this thing has played out so far? The social unrest as far as Trump's own prospects go. Now, the betting markets have flipped over the last couple of weeks and are now pro-Biden, at least as of yesterday.
The betting markets are weird. I was pro-Biden like months ago, and they were still thinking Trump will win. I mean, Trump is losing white voters, okay, and he's losing evangelicals. He's losing Catholics. He can't afford to lose those people.
But things are very fluid, and I don't think the current thing has played out yet politically. I mean, we're just now starting to see polls that take into account, the Lafayette Square thing. We haven't,
it's possible he calms things down. The anti-lockdown forces win. There's no bad consequences. The economy opens up. Certainly, the economic numbers were startlingly not as bad as expected this morning.
Yeah, they were apparently surprisingly good.
And the economy comes roaring back, and he becomes a sort of a law and order person who used the National Guard to good effect, not to fascistic effect. And the Democrats are, nominating a guy who's not all there. So the interesting thing in terms of Biden being not all there is something that Scott Adams, the Dilbert cartoonist, pointed out.
And Trump supporter.
Right. He pointed out that Kamala Harris has vastly improved her speaking style. She's totally transformed herself.
I think she's a good speaker.
If you ignore, she's gone to Michael Sheehan or some sort of Democratic voice coach. She's lost the Valley Girl giggly bullshit, and she talks like a president now. If you turn off the sound. And that indicates that she's a much more plausible candidate. Maybe people won't hate her this time.
She did some radical tweet.
Did not like her in the primaries.
She did some radical tweet that I wish I could remember. I don't think it was quite defund the police, but it was like... anyway, I've always thought she was a good speaker, but tell me about these other two entries that I'm suddenly hearing about. You're better versed than I am.
No, I'm not. Val
Demings, yes, and Keisha Lance Bottoms, who I guess is the mayor of Atlanta. Now, Val Demings is a former police chief, right? And she's from where? They're both African-American.
She's from Florida somewhere.
And they moved, I think as a result of the last week, they moved toward the top of the list of Biden vice presidents. Bottoms
gave this terrific speech saying that people shouldn't loot. And she doesn't have the baggage of actually being a cop the way Demings does. So I guess... you could argue, but that's all I know. I find it hard to believe that Biden would nominate each of them. Like most people, I think it depends on whether Biden feels he has a personal chemistry with them. Maybe he can develop one. He's not an unlikable guy, so it's possible. But anyway, that's all I know. All I know is that I thought it was interesting that Harris sort of did some of the things she would have to do to be worthy of the vice presidential nomination.
I'm sure she's campaigning. But I've always thought she was a pretty good speaker. I mean, I was disappointed in her, I needn't go into it. I've never been super impressed by her, but I've always thought the one thing she could do is stand up and give a good TED Talk or something.
Yeah. I've always thought she was a vapid, contentless careerist. But now she's a little more left-wing than that. Part of her problem is the same problem that the New York Times has, which is they all have staffs made out of millennials that push them way too far to the left.
That was an amazing segue.
So it was an incredible segue, Bob. I wanted an award for that.
Let's talk about the Tom Cotton op-ed.
Well,
the
caricature of the elite media in New York is there are a bunch of sensible old boomer and maybe younger than that editors, and they're held captive by their woke millennial staff, and they can't even go to the office anymore because the woke millennial staff will yell at them if they publish anything that makes the woke millennial staff scared. And the New York Times behaved in a way that completely confirmed this caricature of the media in the left. And I think they've done themselves quite a bit of damage by running this op-ed by Tom Cotton, which was pretty watered down and anodyne op-ed. He said much worse things.
They did damage by running it, or by effectively distancing themselves
by running it and then being intimidated into somehow repudiating it, and saying it was a mistake. And I mean, our friend James Bennett had the easiest job in journalism, which was make the New York Times editorial page better. It was worse. It was terrible. It was an embarrassment to the paper, and he's pretty much failed.
Well, he's got the hardest job in America.
It turned out it was hard because
count Melania's job, which is even harder.
It turns out it was hard because the entrenched forces of liberalism, fortified by the millennials, made it basically impossible to do the job well.
Now we should say, as you suggested, by way of full disclosure, we both know him. He was an intern at the New Republic back in the days when, happily, you and I had higher social status than his, which we sadly no longer do. He's a good guy. What was your so when I read the piece and I'm like, oh shit, do we really need, I never welcome hearing from Tom Cotton, but I didn't anticipate the blowback he got.
He didn't say his, inflammatory expression of show them no quarter. And there are a lot of other inflammatory things that were not in that piece. He just said they should call out the National Guard.
Well, he did have that phrase in there, right? Show them no quarter?
No, that was in a tweet he did a week earlier.
Okay. No, he said he said some things like that were, characteristically, like I did a piece in the newsletter, maybe we can link to, about his earlier New York Times op-ed piece, which I thought was kind of dumb. But it doesn't matter how dumb it was, because I think the question of whether you run it hinges on whether, whether your view of the Times op-ed page is as this just window on the range of opinion, and one criterion for whether something is part of the range of opinion that's covered in the Times op-ed page is it an opinion held by like both the president and a prominent senator, which in this case it is. The op-ed was about invoking the Insurrection Act, doing what Trump wanted to do. And I can certainly see the case. I can certainly see James's case, although apparently James hadn't read that. And we should say James took the brunt, but James is the head of the whole opinion section, including the editorials. There is an editor, at least there was in the old days, just of the op-ed page per se. I don't know who it is now. But one job of that person is to know when there's a piece you should show to your higher up, the person who is editor of the whole opinion page. Apparently, James did not. It's been reported that James didn't even see this piece. And if so, you could argue that he's not the one who screwed up. But in any event,
somebody at the Times, it was a solicited piece. Somebody asked Cotton to submit it.
Well, so it's possible he was in on that but didn't read it. Who knows? Look, I think when the president is advocating something, it's not crazy to say, well, let's find a reasonably articulate version of the argument. You're certainly never going to get that from Trump himself. Tom Cotton at least speaks in complete sentences. I think he's crazy. Can I read can I just interlude just to show you how crazy Tom Cotton is? You'll be glad I did this. Don't roll your eyes. You're going to be glad, okay? Okay, thanks for not rolling your eyes. Listen, Tom Cotton, when he was in the House, offered an amendment to a bill that would punish for up to 20 years in prison not only people in Iran who violate sanctions, but also any of their relatives. And he listed the relatives included parents, children, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, grandparents, great-grandparents, grandkids, great-grandkids. He said that. And he used the word, he said automatically they would be punished. The relatives would be punished automatically. And then he said, quote, I sympathize with their plight if they are harmless, innocent civilians in Iran, but I doubt that is often the case. In other words,
these are Iranians or Americans?
You know, I'm reading this paragraph I did about it, and he clearly, the quote, he definitely is, I sympathize with their plight if they are harmless, innocent civilians in Iran, but I doubt that is often the case. In other words, most Iranians are probably, you should just put in prison because Iranians are so bad, let alone that they are just the great-grandparents of someone who violated the same. I mean, this guy's crazy. And let me just say, it was after this that Bill Kristol swooped in with tons of money and, right-wing pro-Israel money largely, and decided to make Tom Cotton a superstar. And they got.
You think
and
Bill
he ran
Kristol has that much power? I don't think so.
I think Bill Kristol, one thing he's good at is positioning himself at the nexus of a lot of cash flow. That's like his main thing. I mean, he is, look, the free, I don't know exactly the details, but Free Beacon, Emergency Committee for Israel, he was in on the founding of the Weekly Standard. He's good at getting things funded.
Okay. But I hate to tell you, Bob, I just realized that Cotton is a logical post-Trump Republican candidate, because if you look for the guys who might unify the party, I mean, they can't go back to just the old pre-Trump Paul Ryanism, neocon on foreign policy and, free market, austerity on domestic social programs, because that's obviously been rejected. They have to save part of that coalition, and the part that can be saved is the neocon foreign policy. And Cotton is the guy who can bring along the neocons on foreign policy with a Trumpy domestic policy on trade and immigration, unlike Josh Hawley, who is against the neocon foreign policy, I suspect.
Is he?
So, I think so, yeah. So, so Cotton is he's the guy who can bring together enough of the old Republicans, i.e. the neocons, and the new Republicans, i.e. the immigration people, to win the nomination. So get used to it.
So you think he can bring the never Trump neocons back into the fold? Jennifer Rubin, David Frum. I mean, they have. Well, I think they have dissed him in the meanwhile. After having joined the resistance, I know Jennifer Rubin did big time. I was impressed.
Well, don't tell me Jennifer Rubin has power too. Oh my God, yeah, you're going to.
Of course she does. She has a huge Twitter following and a column in the Washington Post.
Oh, please. But she doesn't have Bill Kristol's power.
No, I mean, she doesn't have fundraising power the way Kristol.
Okay, well, it seems to me that a lot of the neocons, if they have a neocon nominee, are going to come along and support him. As you say, they supported Cotton for years. And but a lot depends how much power do you think they have in the Republican Party? I think they have a lot. They don't have majority of power, but they have maybe, I don't know. That's 30% of the Never Trump movement, maybe. I don't know.
Look, any ascendancy of neocons, as you know, worries me. I'm just saying there would have to be a mending of fences in the case of Cotton if you're talking about the Never Trump neocons. Which could certainly happen. I mean, look, they drifted left in the first place to join the Never Trump resistance.
Yeah. I mean, they'd rather have Rubio, who is carefully positioning himself in this space.
Oh, but totally.
The key thing to remember about Rubio is he doesn't vet.
Do we know that?
You worried about Tuberville, things coming out about Tuberville? Huh. Rubio has a lot more.
Well, why didn't we learn that in 2016 then?
Because Chris Christie took him out before it got dropped.
That was an excellent takeout. That was like a suicide bombing.
He took himself out, but Christie was the.
But Christie. I mean, that was amazing.
The vehicle, but
that was the one good thing Chris Christie's done.
It's one of the better days of my life in the last few years.
Why, you don't like Rubio?
No, I hate Rubio.
Because he's an immigration reformer.
He was in the Gang of Eight that proposed the awful Gang of Eight immigration bill, and then he tried to walk away from it, of course.
So, but this is tantalizing. You're saying there are details from Rubio's personal life that will come...
I mean, I think Romney, Romney thought of him for his vice presidential pick, and he didn't pass Romney's vetting.
What is the nature of these details?
I don't want to go into it because I don't know how much of it has been public or not. But
animal, vegetable, mineral, or sexual?
There was some sexual stuff, but I don't think it amounts to much these days. Was it
animal, vegetable, or mineral?
There's the foam party. He was supposedly at a foam party. No, I think it's his family background.
What do you mean? Oh, what, organized crime?
Read Annie Bardak's piece in Politico. Goes into it in detail.
Why don't you say most of the time, Mickey?
Because I don't remember how much Annie revealed publicly in the piece or not. So
she's forgiving. Just tell us and
read Annie Bardak's piece in Politico. We'll include it in the links, and watch the movie Scarface, and you'll have everything you need to know.
Okay, these will be on the Blogging Heads TV site. The links, if you click links mentioned at the bottom of the video thing.
So get used to Tom Cotton.
Oh, please. He's nuts. He is nuts.
Okay.
I mean, he's so much worse than just a regular neocon.
You know who his chief legislative aide is?
I don't know.
Bill Kristol's son.
Oh, right. I wrote that. It's true. Yes, I can confirm that.
I've talked to him. He's a very smart guy, of course.
You know who the original editor of Free Beacon was?
Bill Kristol's son-in-law.
Exactly. I'm telling you, this guy has his tentacles everywhere.
I'm on a roll. Ask me another one.
That's it. He only has two tentacles, I guess, because I can't think of anything else to ask. So, wait, is there anything else we should talk about? Tom Cotton. I mean, I will say, I strained to understand the logic of the people who were freaking out about the Tom Cotton op-ed. And I guess that what they would say is, well, maybe not what they'd say, but if there was a version of their argument I was sympathetic to, it'd be something like, well, these times are, I mean, I'm the one concerned about authoritarianism, right? And I guess it's like, if things are so extraordinary that Jim Mattis is finally unloading on Trump, if there's such extraordinary danger, then maybe the New York Times should change its criteria for, accepting op-eds. I don't know. But I guess that would be the argument.
There's that. They buy your theory of the road to authoritarianism leads through the National Guard. And
not the National Guard per se.
The federalized National Guard.
And regular soldiers, the 82nd Airborne. Tom Cotton literally said, send out the 80. Doesn't that in itself frighten you a little?
Well,
that's not what they were trained for. They were trained to blow people away.
First, but there's all this stuff about how the soldiers aren't trained for policing, and that's true. So you try the police. If the police doesn't work,
then you
got to call the soldiers.
Police. Yeah.
You have to call the soldiers. They're guys with guns who scare people. Sure. So, if the National Guard doesn't work, you call the 101st Airborne. They're guys,
that doesn't work. You waterboard randomly selected citizens. I see. You're right.
But that's the plan. And if you were serious about, stopping unrest, that would be your plan. The only thing stopping you would be if you're worried that Trump is going to somehow order these people to start a civil war to suspend the election. And I just think that's pretty far-fetched.
Can I just say, it's because I have actual concerns that I personally wish these protests would kind of wind down before more bad stuff happens and it all gets ramped up. And I mean, I'm kind of old-fashioned. And my ideal version of a protest is a protest that has kind of actual demands. Like, my criticism of the Occupy stuff was like, demand something. I mean, what are you going to do? Just stay in the park forever? If you don't have any demands, you can never declare victory. It's
hard. It's difficult because you go to the park, you have demands, you're peaceful, you go home, you've accomplished maybe nothing. If you go to the park and break some windows, you probably get more attention, and people will say, "Oh, damn, they're breaking windows. We better do something." So the impetus to go to the police and start some sort of confrontation is there if you want to be effective. I felt that in the anti-war movement. I was always against breaking windows, but I can't say that the breaking of windows didn't help the anti-war movement. It obviously helped the anti-war movement. I'm now ready to write an article for Slate about how violence is necessary for social change.
I think that's what
I can get my old job back.
On Slate these days.
They've written that article. I can get my old job back.
Good luck.
But obviously the New York Times people see it as more of a magazine of opinion, okay? They don't want it to publish views they disagree with the same way at the New Republic, for example. You don't have to publish news you disagree with. When we were at the New Republic, we were blessed, it turns out, I think, by an owner who, A, had radically different views from some of the editors on some issues, and a collection of people who would write Tom Cotton-like op-eds, and who was also a very tolerant person, so he wanted at least a limited diversity of views, all the way from neocon on social policy
to liberal hawk
on
foreign policy.
No, but he had liberal peacenik, Rick Hertzberg, his editor,
and even some of my stuff he tolerated.
And Kinsley's a peacenik, so he's a tolerant academic personality.
True,
and that turned out to be good, and it solved this dilemma of, how do you have sufficient diversity if you're a magazine? And the New York Times, I don't think, has that culture. So it's basically going to be more monotonic, and it's not going to hurt them because the woke people have money and people want to read a publication that reinforces their views. So they're not going to suffer for this, maybe a little in respect and prestige. And at some point, if they start going, the key thing is they feel unsafe and uncomfortable with opinions that scare them, okay? What do they do about facts that scare them, okay? They want to ban the Tom Cotton opinion. Will they ban the inconvenient facts? And at some point, there's going to be a confrontation between the old-style journalists like Maggie Haberman, who want to report the facts with spin and bias, but if something happens, they're going to report it, and the new-style people who are going to want to suppress it. And that's where the schism is going to be, when the Maggie Habermans split off from the woke people. And I don't know what happens then.
I wouldn't want to make the distinction too cleanly between enlightened people who wanted to run that op-ed and benighted people who didn't. Bari Weiss was very pro-op-ed, and I've made the case before that she and her fellow IDWers are not uniform in their insistence on free and untrammeled speech,
What's the example of that?
Well, I wrote a piece about this too in my newsletter, Nonzero newsletter, but it was the example I used was this was when Trump had just done this thing where he banned he used, is it Title IX that bans various kinds of discrimination on campus, or allows the federal government to implement anti-discriminatory policies of various kinds of Title IX.
Probably.
Right? So he used that. He did an executive order using that to kind of ban anti-Semitic speech or something, but then he used as his definition of anti-Semitic speech a criterion that wasn't actually meant to be used that way, and it could well, just taken at face value, could have meant that if somebody on a panel discussion says the Israeli forces in the West Bank use Gestapo-like tactics, which arguably they have done in some cases, that the federal government would have the power to deny federal funding, to withdraw federal funding from a college that permitted that speech. That's how extreme it was. And so I went and I looked at all the IDW people, basically. We can link to the piece. Bari Weiss did not condemn it, and her one or two tweets tended toward its support for it. And that's what I mean by inconsistency. This was a glaring example of unwarranted constraints.
But the people who support running the Cotton editorial are not. They're not. Bari Weiss wrote some tweets about it, but they don't. They're more than Bari Weiss. Bari Weiss.
No, that's my point. I'm just saying not all of them are unequivocal. I'm saying some of them have a support for Tom Cotton per se, right, that probably derives from a specific ideological affinity.
I think the answer would be that one of them does.
Well, okay, but she's a prominent one. I mean, she's at the Times, along with, you know.
I guess, but, you know, and she tweets about it. The interesting thing will be whether Bret Stephens goes along with, or whether he objects. And if he writes a column defending Bennett and defending the piece, whether they then turn on him, as they've tried before, and make life so unpleasant for him that he leaves.
Well, I can't believe he'll condemn the running of the piece, right? That he wouldn't do.
No, he would be condemning the woke millennials who.
No, but I mean, the question is whether he writes anything or whether he defends running the piece.
Right.
Whether he writes nothing or he writes something defending.
I guess the smart move for him is to keep his head down and write about something else.
Might be.
Something uncontroversial like global warming. But on the other hand, he's a columnist. He needs to have something to write twice a week. So.
Just quickly, I actually thought he got... I'm not a fan, obviously, but I thought he got a bad rap on that early column. I thought he was trying to... Wasn't he trying to walk back his traditional global warming skepticism in that column?
Yes, but...
But people characterized it as exactly the opposite, right?
This guy, he's managed to position himself at the intersection where nobody likes him.
Well, it's
very impressive.
He's certainly got my dislike locked up.
I don't like him either. So... anyway, I have a bunch of other little junk.
So quick local news.
Okay.
Some Lewis with a Z, Novak or Nowak, tells us that Pangolin Delight there's already a Kickstarter for something called Pangolin Delight, not a podcast. There's a challenge from you that I could read another time. An ideological challenge for you that I could read another time. We're running kind of late. Somebody last time, because my agent was calling at the end, I asked for a book idea, and here's an idea from Twitter handle Hedonic Urge. Good handle. Book idea is The Evo-Psych, Evolutionary Psychology, Roots of Our Current Manipulation by Social Media, Outrage Culture, Global Village Leading to Global Gossip, Explain the Current Badness. I think that's a good title, actually. Explaining the Current Badness. Then the second half of the book is how we can leverage our monkey brains with pro-social media. So, whoops. I will take that under advisement.
That is...
Oh, and also... Yeah, go ahead.
It's hard to believe that hasn't been written, but why the evolutionary roots of why everything sucks is not a bad book.
I thought I wrote that book, but okay.
I thought you did too. That you and Steven Pinker would be two of the people who wrote it. Well,
no, but Steve these days thinks everything is hunky dory. Also, did you read that thing I sent you from the 25-year-old who said he because of our podcast he is supporting the Nonzero Foundation Patreon crusade at the highest level.
You start a Patreon, you get an initial influx of cash, and then you're obligated to keep working for how long? I mean, you can't take the cash and do nothing, right?
Actually, Jordan Peterson took it and then went over to Russia and got an induced coma.
It's like my brother's.
You could do that. We could do that.
It's like my law school roommate's idea was you take up a fund and you use the money to bribe Paul McCartney into not making an album this year, so we could have a Patreon to shut us up, right?
Absolutely.
If you give to this Patreon, we'll keep working. If you give to that other Patreon, and whichever one's the most money will affect our behavior.
It'd be more effective if we could get ourselves broadcast like in airports or something, like captive audience, and then demand. Like I would pay money for them to quit broadcasting CNN in airports.
No kidding.
So wait, but this is what I mean to say to you, Mickey, is if we just set up a Patreon page for this show, because you sense the injustice here, right? Are you out? I'm surely you feel a moralistic fervor welling up as you realize that you are part of the reason this guy's giving money to my Patreon page. You're getting zero zilch. Wouldn't you like to change that?
No, because I have the freedom to quit anytime I want, Bob.
Okay.
The power I wield promiscuously.
This reminds me a little of your decision to quit blogging at Slate when you ran for the Senate, and I think we all agree that was possibly your your worst decision.
Right, I would have won. If I'd kept blogging, I would have gotten.
You wouldn't have won. You would have
gotten 5.1%.
You would have become more famous, and
I did keep blogging. I just didn't blog at Slate.
Oh,
my final theory is that I think all these magazines, they're laying off people. It's a slow, agonizing process. BuzzFeed, Vox, and Vice should just merge into a magazine called Woke, and actually Slate will be on their left. Slate will attack them. Slate is moved wildly to the left, and
wait, you said BuzzFeed, who and Vice?
BuzzFeed, Vice, and Vox. And they could call it Wox.
Now, what about the Daily Beast? Where are they? See, they seem to me on foreign policy to be a little neoconish, right? Or at least liberal interventionist slash neoconish.
You may be right. I it's.
But their editor, is it Noah Shachtman?
I think you just read the pieces you're linked to, so you have no sense of what the overall view of the magazine is.
Anyway, their editor, I thought was tweeting more than is good for the country, retweeting these, isn't this cop behavior outrageous? When actually, if you look at the clip, maybe we should reserve judgment.
You won't write for Woke magazine.
No, I won't. No, that's true. I'm related to some people who could, but not me. So No, go ahead.
Matt Iglesias might not write for Woke magazine either. He wrote a piece saying, this violence is hurting, and he's getting blowback from his fellow
Did he write that piece? Well, God bless you, Matt. It's so funny watching us get so old that these guys who were just out of college when Blogging Heads started and were on it, like Matt and Ezra Klein, are getting hit from the left. They were the left.
They're old now. They're old. Ezra Klein is all set. His career path is he becomes Hugh Sidey, or he becomes some respected. Please. He becomes some.
He's not in Hugh Sidey territory.
He becomes some respected moderate, pundit type. But Iglesias, I think he doesn't have. He has more of an edgy sensibility, so I'm not sure he has that path open for him. Though every time I hear him on NPR, he does sound like Hugh Sidey.
Ezra or Matt?
Matt.
Is he on NPR a lot? That's good.
He's on NPR sometimes, but he tones himself way down. He gives them what they want.
Matt's major deficiency, he knows I believe this, is that he at some point quit writing about foreign policy, where he brings a lot of value added to foreign policy when he writes about it, which has not happened for a decade or so. Anyway,
okay.
So I've lost my mouse. It's on the floor. So we can end this. I was going to say we cannot end this because I've lost my mouse.
How long have we gone on?
Wait, what'd you say? I just took my earplug out.
How long have we gone on? Has it been over an hour?
It's too long. I don't think anybody's listening or watching.
Okay.
But good. I will say, if they are watching, this will be a good test. If they are watching on YouTube, don't forget to click the like button, and that will bring... nobody's watching, never mind. But when you do that, it brings more people from YouTube. It plays into their algorithm.
Even I'm not watching. It's like...
No, I know. This is terrible.
It's like Van Morrison, who gets bored with his songs as he's recording them halfway through. So,
does he?
If you listen to the songs, they fade. In the second half, he just doesn't. He rarely delivers the goods because he's bored. He's just finishing the song. It's like the first minute, and then he's phoning it in.
Well, maybe we should stop before that happens.
Okay.
So we'll see you presumably next week. Although, as you noted, you can quit at any moment.
Anytime you're on Montana hooks here.
You got a lot of leverage.
You better be really nice to me. Okay.
All right. See you around.
See ya.